Turning now to the impact of the multilateral diplomatic response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, President Biden yesterday announced even stronger sanctions, this time targeting oligarchs. And they may have found an audience. The threat of more sanctions on top of the unprecedented ones already in place appear to be creating a tension between Vladimir Putin and his cronies, those who rose to power after the fall of the Soviet Union through privatization of public goods. And though oligarchs today are mainly synonymous with Russia, their influence is not much different from that of a billionaire here in the United States. Now, I am not suggesting the U.S. has already become an oligarchy, but no one can better explain how a democracy can easily head down this path than my next guest. Watch this.
Oligarchy means government of and by a few at the top who exercise power for their own benefit. It comes from the Greek word oligarchos, meaning few to rule or command. Even a system that calls itself a democracy can become an oligarchy if power becomes concentrated in the hands of a very few wealthy people and a corporate and financial elite.
Joining us now is Robert Reich, a former U.S. Labor Secretary and author of The System, Who Rigged It and How We Fix It. And this week, when President Biden announced that he was going to sanction all of these oligarchs, I thought of you because I think, you know, the word oligarch, most people are like, what does that mean? And I want to start off actually with a quote from your latest piece in The Guardian. You note that capitalism is consistent with democracy only if democracy reduces the inequalities, insecurities, joblessness, and poverty that accompany unbridled profit-seeking. The fact is that billionaire wealth in this country has surged during the global pandemic. So what does that say about the state of our democracy when we have these billionaires that are basically able to make profit hand over fist while the rest of us are sort of left with the scraps? And how does that connect to what we're watching overseas in Russia and Ukraine?
Zerlina, there's absolutely no doubt that America has what we might call an oligarchy, certainly a small number of billionaires, multi-billionaires, that have a great deal of political influence and control. Now, the irony is that that is a great threat to American democracy, obviously, and has been, as the great Justice Louis Brandeis said during the Gilded Age of the late 19th and early 20th century. We have a choice in this country. We can either have great wealth in the hands of a few, or we can have democracy, but we can't have both. Now, the irony, though, is that in Russia, we are counting on the power of the billionaires, the oligarchs in Russia, to either depose Putin or to limit and constrain him. I mean, basically, there are only two groups of people there in Russia who have the ability to contain Putin. One are the oligarchs, the others are the generals. Putin probably doesn't have to worry about the generals because he is from the KGB. He understands the power politics inside the Kremlin. But the oligarchs also have huge power there. That's why the Biden administration is targeting them, so that they will feel pain and they will put some constraints on Putin right now.
How does the term oligarch apply to people we may know their names here in the United States? Like, who should we apply the term oligarch to?
Well, there are 745 families in the United States that are super rich. I mean, they're in the hundreds of billions of dollars, or close to the hundreds of billions of dollars, centibillionaires. We haven't actually talked about centibillionaires, but they're very close to centibillionaires. I don't want to blame them. I don't, you know, I think it's wrong to say that they are at fault. Certainly, they are not bloodthirsty. They're not going to do anything terrible. But undoubtedly, the trend has been very disturbing. Because even the most recent data we have from the election of 2012, the richest 1/100th of 1%. I'm not talking about the 1%. I'm not even talking about the richest 1/10 of 1%. I'm talking about the richest 1% of 1%. They supplied 40% of all campaign finance in 2012. Now, that's the latest data we have. So you can imagine how much more the, let's call them the Senate billionaires or the oligarchs are spending on American politics. And that big money obviously distorts our democracy.
So understanding how, this works over in Russia is actually helpful to understand the threats to our own democracy here. I mean, essentially what you're saying is that these uber rich people, and we're not just talking about like rich people, we're talking about the uber rich, they basically use their wealth and influence to make a government and that will pass laws that benefit them at the expense of everyone else. I mean, how is that a threat to the democratic system as we know it? I mean, how bad is the threat?
Well, it's a huge threat. And I mean, if you just look at the increase in billionaires' wealth, these 745 billionaire families I'm talking about, they increased their wealth during the pandemic, just the last 2 years, by 70%. That was, that comes down to $2.1 trillion. Not billion, $2.1 trillion for 745 families. Well, you do the math. I mean, they have the capacity, because of that wealth, to inundate American politics, not only in terms of campaign contributions, but also in terms of shaping public opinion, for example. Now, are they doing that? To some extent, they are. Are people aware of that? I think a lot of Americans feel that the game is rigged. I mean, Donald Trump in 2016, we heard him over and over again campaign on the fact that the game is rigged. And I think that a lot of the anger we find in America today is really fundamentally because people feel that they're powerless, that they can't, they're working as hard as ever, harder than ever. They're not getting ahead, while the people at the top are doing better and better and better, and wielding their power to affect changes in the rules of the game that affect them, that help them, but hurt everybody else. And I mean, you can see it all around you. Look what's happened to labor unions. I mean, labor has, it used to be more than a third of all Americans in the private sector, workers, belonged to a labor union. They had a lot of power. They were able to exert that power to raise wages. Today, 6%. 6% of workers in the private sector are unionized because there has been so much union busting, and the laws have actually changed over the last 30 years to allow corporations to do that kind of union busting. Well, that's just one example. Look at monopolization. Zerlina, all across America, you find big companies are monopolizing in ways that the antitrust laws of this country never used to allow. Well, why has that changed? Because you have huge power, both from corporations and from these, let's call them what they are, oligarchs.
In terms of how to prevent the continuing slide towards autocracy, I think Malcolm Nance, in his book called, America Becoming a Part of the Axis of Autocracies in Putin's Vision, how do we prevent it from getting worse? I mean, what can the people do, frankly, to limit the outsized power of these billionaires and let's just call them oligarchs? I don't know why we use two different terms when we're talking about Russian billionaires versus American ones, but how do we prevent these oligarchs here from having outsized influence in dismantling the democracy and our slide towards authoritarianism a la Russia?
Well, we came, during the 2020 election, both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders both proposed wealth taxes. That is, taxes on the ultra-billionaires, the oligarchs, that would not only pay for a lot of things we need to do in this country, but also reduce that power that comes with great wealth. We could do that. I mean, essentially, those ideas have died. Why have they died? Partly because of the power of the oligarchs. See, there, Zerlina, is where we get into the kind of vicious cycle. The more power and more wealth you see at the top, the more difficult it is to come up with any kind of taxes or any kind of reforms, even campaign finance reform, that will prevent that wealth from having the power that generates even more wealth. But we have to do it. we can't give up. I mean, we can see the dangers in autocracy. We can see the dangers abroad. If there's anything we are learning from what's happening in Russia, but what we see around the world is that democracy is precious. We have to hold on to it. It is our most precious legacy. We've got to do whatever we can to make sure that it is sustained.
Democracy is precious. That's a really good point to end on. Robert Reich, thank you so much for being here and helping us understand these connections. It's so important in moments like this to draw those connections. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Zerlina.
Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.